Section 16 of From the Latchkey of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Larry Wilson. From the Latchkey of My Bookhouse, edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Irving, Washington, American 1783 to 1859. Long, long ago, just at the close of the American Revolution, when New York was a little old town with all the air of an overgrown village, a small boy was born there whose mother named him Washington Irving, in honor of General Washington. When the little fellow was about 6 years old, his nurse took him one day to see the procession escorting General Washington to Federal Hall to take his oath as first President of the United States. Pressing through the throng, the nurse dragged her small charge straight up to the great man and told him that the boy had been given his name. With a kindly smile, Washington stopped to give his young namesake a blessing. Washington Irving grew to be an adventurous lad. He liked to visit new scenes and observe strange manners and customs. When he was still the merest slip of a child, he made long tours of discovery into the foreign parts of his own little city, and more than once his parents had to employ the town crier to hunt up their wandering son by crying his name through the town. He loved to roam around the Battery, and to wander out on the piers to watch the outgoing ships departing to distant climes. With what longing eyes did he gaze after their lessening sails, and waft himself in fancy to the very ends of the earth. As he grew into boyhood, Washington extended the range of his observations. He now spent his holiday afternoons in rambles far out into the country round about New York, visiting the little villages where the descendants of the old Dutch settlers continued to dwell, and pushing on to the very distant hills. He made voyages, too, in a little sailboat up the lordly Hudson River, whose cliffs and towering highlands breathed forth the very spirit of old Dutch and Indian legends. He penetrated into the heart of the Catskill Mountains that rise to the west of the river, changing their magical hues with every hour of the day. At times he peered into some dark glen, lonely and wild and tangled, or stood at the foot of a waterfall, a sliding sheet of silver slipping down over mossy rocks. Again he came out on the edge of a precipice, whence he could look out for miles and miles over all the sun-flooded valley and see far down below the twisting ribbon of the Hudson. He knew those mountains in sunshine and in storm, now in the calm of evening when they threw their long blue shadows so peacefully over the valleys, or gathered a hood of gray vapors about their heads to glow in the setting sun like a crown of glory. Now when the thunder clouds lowered, the lightning went leaping from crag to crag, and peal after peal of thunder rolled crashing down their heights. And at the foot of these fairy mountains, its smoke curling up through the trees, would nestle a little Dutch village, where the houses had latticed windows, and the gable fronts were surmounted by the quaintest of weathercocks. Here, in the shade of some great tree before the old tavern, Irving could always find a club of worthies smoking their pipes and whiling away the long, lazy summer's day by telling endless stories. But as the boy grew to young manhood, he began to long to go further still in his travels. He had seen and loved so much of the natural beauty of America, her mighty lakes and mountains, her valleys and trackless forests, her broad, deep rivers and boundless plains. But now old Europe beckoned him. He longed for her treasures of art, her quaint and different customs, her poetic associations. He longed to loiter about her ruinous old castles, and reconstruct in his fancy all the shadowy grandeur of her past. And so, when the young maid who had been his sweetheart died, and there was nothing more to hold him in America, off he went to England. Already he was known there as the author of Salmagundi Papers and that humorous mixture of fact and fancy, Knickerbocker's History of New York. And so in England he found a place ready made for him. He could travel now as much as he pleased, and he set down in his sketch book all the interesting things he saw, little home scenes of rural repose and sheltered quiet, peasants in country lanes, as well as the solemn magnificence of grand old Westminster Abbey. A journey to Spain gave him the rich store of Spanish and Moorish legend to put into two books, the Alhambra and the Conquest of Granada. Here, too, he came across certain intensely interesting documents concerning Columbus, which had heretofore been unknown, and what must he do but write a wonderful Life of Columbus? After 17 long years abroad, he returned at length to New York and bought the beautiful place called Sunnyside at Tarrytown on the Hudson, not far from Sleepy Hollow. No woman ever replaced the sweetheart of his youth, and Irving never married, but here at beautiful Sunnyside he passed all the rest of his days, quitting it only once for any length of time, and then to serve for 4 years as American minister to Spain. But however great was the volume of work that Washington Irving put forth, his name always calls first to mind the magic of the Catskills and the Hudson, gleaming through mists of romantic old Dutch legends. Important works: The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, Rip Van Winkle. Jackson Helen Hunt, American, 1831 1885. Helen Hunt Jackson once heard 2 Indians in Boston tell the tale of their people's wrongs at the hands of the American government, and she was so moved that she wrote first a pamphlet and then the story of Ramona, to arouse the public to demand reforms. Important works: Nellie's Silver Mine, Ramona, Cat Stories. Jacobs, Joseph, English editor, born in Australia, 1854. Important works: English Fairy Tales, Celtic Fairy Tales, Indian Fairy Tales. Jewett, Sarah Orne, American, 1849 1909. A Maine woman who wrote very truthful New England stories. Important works: The Country of the Pointed Firs, Betty Lester, Deephaven. Johnson, Clifton, American, editor of Fairy Tales, 1865. Important works: The Oak Tree Fairy Book, The Birch Tree Fairy Book. Jordan, David Starr, American, 1851. Dr. Jordan is a big, simple, warm-hearted, impetuous man whose chief work of late years has been the attempt to impress men with a sense of the uselessness of war. He grew up on a farm in New York and worked his way through college by waiting on table, husking corn, and digging ditches. He became the first president of Leland Stanford University and is a scientist of renown. Important works: The Book of Night and Barbara, True Tales of Birds and Beasts. Keats, John, English, 1795 1821. John Keats was a small boy whose father kept a livery stable in London, but he was given a good education and proved a studious little fellow. Indeed, his masters had to drive him away from his books to get him to play out of doors. Books, books, books. He carried them with him everywhere, even to the dining table, and fought valiantly if he was disturbed in his reading. A high-spirited lad he was, and always easily moved to deep feeling. Once he fought for an hour with a butcher's boy whom he found tormenting a kitten. In the lad's heart there dwelt, too, a deep love of beauty, the wild beauty and color of the Cornish coast. How he loved it! All nature to him was a poem. The wind in the trees was music. Once he visited the British Museum and saw there the lovely old relics of Greek and Roman life. Presto! There sprang into life in his heart all that interest in Greek subjects to be shown later in his poems. Keats was educated to be a surgeon, but friendship for the poets, Shelley and Leigh Hunt, soon turned all his thoughts to poetry. His volumes of verse, however, were violently criticized, and at length the young poet, sick and disappointed, went off to Italy, where he died. Then only was he recognized as among England's greatest poets. Kilmer, Joyce (American, 1886 1918). An active young fellow, full of mirth and keen zest in life, was Joyce Kilmer. When the World War began he was already a poet of renown. He enlisted immediately and was killed in action. Section 17